Hello. For our class, I have a couple. This is going to be a bit long, and then I'm going to have another video. I'm also giving you 2 videos this week to watch. I'm going to give you till Monday on the discussion, but we only have 4 weeks for this class, and I had 5 weeks for the other class, so we're kind of limited. This is called the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity. I wrote cultural. What is the purpose of it? Well, if I'm teaching this class about civil rights and advocacy, I have to give you some kind of means to think differently than to simply say, oh, that guy's a racist. You know, with President Trump and stuff he said, well, obviously things have gotten so hot and people are so angry. You can see that as long as the rhetoric is as vicious as it is, and I can be just as vicious as anybody else, but we're talking advocacy here, okay? So calling people names is just going to guarantee that nothing ever changes. You know, once you start cussing people or impugning their integrity completely, even if they don't deserve respect, you're never going to get respect and you're never going to be able to negotiate with them. So that's my point here. The same with the legal cases. I think I mentioned in there something about, yeah, you can have legal cases, but the fact is, if you think you're going to get a civil rights attorney to file a lawsuit over things that happen in your school, you got another thing coming, as they call it. It's just not going to happen. My Three Stooges clock is going off. It's 7 o'clock, but I'm grinding away. I hope none of you are in the tornado areas. We have thunderstorm about every other day now. Okay, now I got this sheet I sent to you, and you have a color version of it on your computer. I can't print in color. This sheet was originally developed by this guy, Milton Bennett, years ago. I've kind of changed it just to give it different and update it. And this isn't updated enough because if I did it now, I could include those, whatever you want to call those camps on the border in South America. I mean, with Mexico and El Paso, which are very disturbing to me. Okay, so there are 3 stages. So instead of saying someone's a bigot, a racist, we can talk about them in more neutral ways and give them kind of a benefit of a doubt that if they're enlightened, they will change their tune. Now, you know, there are a lot of people that are racist and have racist views, and we'll never change those views. But the word racist and bigoted and things like that, and you're a segregationist or whatever you want to call it, these are pretty hurtful things. And it's like throwing major rocks at people. If you hit them a few times with them, you don't have to worry about ever having to deal with them again because there'll be no basis for cooperation. So what do? First of all, that means you have to hold your tongue and your temper at times. Even if you're the principal of a school, you have to be careful and maneuver to get things done. They had a guy work for Reagan many years ago, and maybe the old Bush too, and he was called the Velvet Glove. In other words, he could be tough, but he was also gentle. He was careful to get things done. So he didn't make enemies of everybody. No one got bruised up enough that they really hated him. Nowadays, we don't have that issue. We have people that punch hard on all sides. All right, so stage 1 is what I call the invisible people or denial of difference. When I say denial of difference, it's really more invisibility. These are homeless people. Have you ever been in a situation where you're in a big city and you kind of step past homeless people? I have in Denver. I could get upset about it and say, no, I should have bent down and talked to the guy and gotten involved. But I chose not to, and that's really the tendency of most people. I can give a lot of examples. The same thing, people in nursing homes. Well, they're old, their time is short, I'm busy. So I don't think about them unless my mother's in there or my relative, then I'm concerned about it. But what about all the other people? You know, it's great to have relatives that love you, but it'd be nice to get help from others. Same thing with veterans that come back from the war, and everybody said, well, we gave them a parade and stuff, and then they don't think about it. And even if they say things like, thank you for your service, if that's all you say, that's pretty bland. That means maybe they appreciate that, or maybe people just say it automatically and offer nothing else. And that's the problem, see. It's like saying Gesundheit. You're not really too serious about their sneezing. It's more of a reflex. Migrant workers are people that are ignored. They don't get their pay. Who's going to defend them? Oh, they're undocumented. They don't have their papers. In Spanish, sin documentos, without papers. And so nobody worries about it. They get cheated, and so what? You think the sheriff's going to enforce the rules? Or you think the guy that owns a big farm is going to get in trouble? So he can use it. He can abuse them. Same thing with people who abuse women. If it's in a place where men can get away with stuff, they're going to do it. Or anyone in power that can abuse anyone else, whatever that situation is. Refugee camps. What refugees are they? The Rohingya, the people being driven out of Myanmar, which was old Siam in the old days, and they went to East Pakistan, which is Bangladesh, and then they get abused there, even though they're Muslims. And no one cares for them. You can see commercials at night about it. You can see it for Iraqis, for people from Syria were driven out. Some of them still being murdered by their government and the Russians, and sometimes even by us when we're trying to help them, we might bomb them by accident. So these are all the people that are invisible, and most people don't think about them. Now let's take the example of the kids in that detention area in El Paso. That's one really, obviously, if you haven't heard about it, you haven't been watching any news at all. But there are people denying that any abuse is taking place and everything's fine there. And a large percentage of people go with that statement because of who said it. So, oh, it's okay there, no problem. But you have other people saying those kids are not being treated, their little children not being cared for. Very serious issue. So they're invisible, at least to a lot of people, and they're certainly invisible to people that can make the difference. What is the affective quality? Affective, that's the heart. Affection, you know, the word affection, affective. And there is no feeling unless you know about it, and then you have deep emotional hurt over it, like I do. So you have to do awareness campaigns. People have to get out the word. If they're invisible, let's make them visible. If it's a homeless person, if it's a person forced into prostitution, if it's a woman abused by her husband, if it's a child with a disability that's not being met in a local school district and people seem to just hand the ball off to others and nobody takes responsibility, then we have to advertise it. A lot of times you see that when something is on Facebook, then things happen. Changes occur because of social media, although social media can also lie to you. How do we behave toward them? Well, we don't. A lot of people will almost be aggressive in saying, hey, I didn't make them homeless. It's not my problem. Maybe the government will do something about it. So those are some of the issues. Now, I happen to use a historical example here because I was trying to give, this isn't just something now, but the people that came in and worked in the garment districts in New York were controlled by the mob. Louis Lepke, who was, a lot of mobsters are equal opportunity, Italian, Jewish, Irish, a lot of them. There were people that took advantage, and it could be from any group. They just had to be a person with no integrity who wanted to make a fast buck. And so this guy, Louis Lepke, and then other groups that were around there took advantage. And they said, all these people, they don't speak English. They don't know what's going on. We can control them. And heck, we're so violent, we'll threaten the guys that own the factories if they don't pay a certain amount of money and we get a cut. We'll go on strike. We'll make them not work. And so we'll even hurt the people that own the factories because we're thugs. And so what do you see at this stage? Well, a lot of people just don't say anything, or they just think it's kind of curious. The interesting thing about invisibility is that the groups may be visible, but they may be running a little restaurant or something in town. And people say, oh, I'm not threatened by the restaurant. And their food is really good, but I really don't care about them. I'm not interested in their culture. And as long as they give me what I want, whatever, or as long as they stay out of my way. So invisibility is the thing. What needs to be done, this is the important part at the bottom. You have to get information about what's going on. You have to get, as an advocate, you have to get people interested. If it's about that place in El Paso, you have to get photographs. You have to get professional people going there and saying, this is a travesty. This is a bad situation. You also need to show that people are human beings. I saw something that disturbed me terribly. A person was down in this El Paso detention area, and they pounded on the door, and he said, are you kids all right? And a little note came out from under the door, and the kid said, can we help you? And the lady started crying because she said, they're the ones who are in trouble, and they're offering to help us. That really affected me. Okay, stage 2. You know, I did put Trump's name in there. How'd that happen? Anyhow, defense against difference. This is when you say the group that's in your country. And this doesn't have to be an ethnic group or a linguistic group. This could be a union in a non-union town. It could be people with a different opinion or a different religion. And suddenly they're in your town and people are converting to their religion. And you're really upset because you're in a town in Nebraska. It's always been Lutheran or Catholic, and suddenly some other group's coming in. And depending on who they are, you get very upset and say, well, I don't want them getting my kids to join that religion. So what do you get? You get very defensive, and you think, what can I do? I can say a lot of bad things about them. Even if it's not true, I'm going to smear them and make them look worse because I want to stop them at all costs. I feel they're threatening us. So it's a siege mentality. I make it look like I'm the victim and they're coming after me. That victim thing is very important. You need to watch that in the news, how people portray themselves, that I'm the victim here. You know, think about that. You try to discriminate against that group. You try to keep them out. You try to block them. You talk to other people about, yeah, we don't want them getting a star quarterback on the football team, or we don't want them pushing their ideas in our school. You know, if we have a fellowship for Christian athletes, we don't want a certain group running it, maybe converting people. And I'm just thinking, you know, of an example. The same thing would happen if there was you felt there were drug use in town, and you very properly would say, oh, I don't want my kids to use drugs. I don't want them to be around those people. You're going to have the siege mentality. My point in talking about these mentalities, the invisibility, and this one's the siege, and the next one's denial. I think it's denial. Yeah, it is. No, it will be, sorry. The next one will be minimization of difference. So these 3 stages are ways of thinking without using the word racist, bigots, threats, etc. So once you identify this general concept, I'm on the side that's really defensive. I feel threatened by this group. This group could be speaking another language. They could be a different religion. It could be a bunch of political liberals or conservatives in a town where most people think the other way. Or they could be anything. I mean, you know, they could be advocating social behavior and drinking and partying, and I'm very opposed to that. So I'm going to protect myself and my people. I'm going to try to limit our contact with them. and I'm probably going to spread untruths about them if I get desperate. And then often the big thing is fear is the weapon of those who are in the siege mentality. I'm afraid. I'm afraid they're going to destroy our way of life. They're going to take my job. They're going to get involved in my family. They're going to corrupt my family. They're going to corrupt my town. They're going to ruin the good times we had. They're not going to pick up their trash. You're going to see this in the videos on New Faces on Main Street, especially in that one. They talk about, well, you know, these groups coming in town, they're bringing in gangs, or they're bringing in people that won't pay their bills, or they're bringing in people that'll take our jobs, or they're bringing in people that won't learn English. They're bringing in people who are going to cost me money in my taxes. I don't want to spend money. I don't want my tax money going to teach their kids. You often get that expression, them, those, and their people. Their people, those people. That's always a very negative one. African Americans often recognize that in historical talk that when people started talking about you people or those people, they were talking very specifically about African Americans. And even if they were trying to be nice, they'd say, you people need to do this, or you people need to do that, as if you're a group and you get together and decide to mess things up, there's something wrong with you. Anytime you hear that talk, that is the defensive talk. In fact, the words just follow right with each other. Human beings aren't too hard to figure out once they're in these types of attitudes. The example I gave was one from I actually gave several. Civil rights, obviously, an exercise of power. And you remember the dogs were used to attack protesters, and people were beaten to death, and people were murdered and buried by the Ku Klux Klan. But one interesting example, which is not racial, was the 1932 crackdown on military veterans from World War I that were suffering from the Depression, and they believed they should get a cash bonus from the United States government because of their service in World War I. Well, what happened was the government didn't want to give them the money. And while Herbert Hoover was still in, he authorized General Douglas MacArthur to take the military and beat the living crap out of the veterans in the streets and kick them out of the city of Washington, D.C. This was later, this was a guy, a big hero, you know, but the fact that he used the military to beat up veterans from the First World War caused incredible anger. And a lot of people were angry. They said these veterans think they're owed something. Can you imagine doing that now if some president said, I got a bunch of military veterans in Washington. I'm going to get military guys to go up there and beat these old guys and drive them out of town, break their bones. I think that'd be like a disastrous PR. You imagine a military attacking former veterans. That would not happen. But that's the defense or the siege mentality. Now, you're going to see examples of all these here, but one of the examples here that I think is really overlooked completely is the minimization. That's when you say that, yes, they are a different color than us, or they're a different ethnic group, they have different language, but deep down they're just like us. Wrong. Nobody deep down is just like you. You're unique. Your little culture is unique. People aren't just like you. Now, here's what happens. Why is this dangerous? You'd say, well, isn't thinking they're just like us just wonderful? It is if they're allowed to stay and keep their integrity of their culture. But if you go in and say, they're just like us. In fact, I'm going to make them just like us. I'm going to get them to change their religion. I'm going to get them to speak my language. I'm going to teach them that whatever they think that's a little different than us is wrong, and we're going to fix that. So I'm going to teach and see you as a teacher in ESL advocacy. This can actually cause kids to break away and disrespect their family because they say, oh, I'm not going to be like that. I'm going to be different from the folks in the old country. You may have heard statements of people years ago, oh, yeah, they were Swedes from the old country. They had a lot of strange ways about them. But they were their ways, and they believed in them. And yes, society will change slowly. But if you go in and try to institute a dramatic change, you're actually destroying the culture. You're destroying the fabric of the culture. That's why I want you to look at these in terms of advocacy. Now, I want you to think about these. And I've got in here cognitive, affective. What do people think like? What do they act like? What's their behavior? And I always call this a little bit the missionary approach, because some people think that we got to convert people so they're no longer whatever, going to hell, or they're no longer improper. Could be a political conversion, it could be a cultural conversion, could be a social class. You know, like you want to be in with the in kids at the school. We've decided you should be one of us, and you need to leave your friends behind. That's a real common one that people could relate to. So it means one group trying to change another, or an individual from that group. So, and I have the example in here, and I think this still works on YouTube, but I can't swear, is Native Americans. And you can see a little picture here, what they look like when they came in, what they look like after they've been whited, after they've been taught to be like white men. You must look like us in order to be like us. And that was a disastrous thing. And this guy had said, kill the Indian in him and save the man. Imagine if someone came from a foreign country to the United States and took your kids away from you and said, we're going to save them from the way you are. When we get done with them at school, they'll not want to be like you. They would destroy you. It would just destroy you. And that's a lot of what happened in Native American culture. And I would not be an expert on that at all. It's just my observation. There's so much more hurt beyond anything I could imagine. So those are the areas of the three. So instead of saying a racist, a bigot, you say they're in the defensive stage if they're very paranoid. They're in the minimization stage if they think, oh, everybody's just like us, and we're going to help them become like us. And then that first stage is we're in denial because we just ignore them. And right now, the kids in El Paso are being ignored, not by everybody by any means, but by a lot. Think what that means. Now, other examples, the Japanese that were interned during World War II, they were American citizens, many of them. Some of them could go and be in the military, but their parents and families were put in cages or put in camps. You can call them cages as far as I'm concerned. What a stain, what is going on, what a stain that is in our country. All right. You know, you may not like my opinion, but I'm teaching this class. There's certain things I can't just let slide. I can't. Of course, things on economic policy, we're all different and have different opinions. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit in another video about language rights. I might make that later tonight. The law stuff, just to let you know, the legal law stuff doesn't really thrill me. And I know it doesn't usually make much impact on students, because even if you could cite all the laws and decisions to a non-lawyer or some administrator, it doesn't mean much to them. They don't have a judge ruling on them. So, but I still want you to know about these and think about it. Okay, that'll be something I'll talk about later. Okay, I'm going to shut this down. I hope this has been somewhat helpful to you. Now, what I want you to do, though, is think about these three stages as you look at New Faces on Main Street and 9500 Liberty. And believe me, these things are percolating. They are right there on display. You can take certain individuals, especially some that are afraid to speak up, and they just say, oh, I don't know what's going on in Manassas. I don't know what to say. I'm just going to be quiet. I don't want to fight with people. And that's people that essentially are in stage one. Stage two people are angry and they're trying to force change. And stage two, by the way, can go both ways. That's the interesting thing about this, is that depending on what's happening, there may be injustice on both stages. You have to be aware of that. Okay, thanks.